Some days start so ordinary that you never see the storm coming. That morning, I was in my workshop, the comforting hum of my tools filling the air. Wood dust danced in the sunbeams filtering through the windows as I worked on a custom bookshelf for a client. Carpentry always kept my hands busy and my mind calm. After a decade in the military, I'd learned to find peace in discipline and focus. But if life has taught me anything, it's that peace is fragile. My phone buzzed on the workbench, shattering the rhythm of the sander in my hands. It was Liam Bennett, a buddy from my army days. We'd served together in the same unit, and these days, he worked as a security coordinator on construction sites. He always had a knack for keeping things running smoothly or sniffing out trouble before it started. "Ethan, got a minute?" Liam's voice had that clipped tone that told me this wasn't just a friendly call. "Sure, what's up?" I asked, wiping sawdust from my hands. "We've got a situation at the Fairmont building," he said. "Some kind of protest. Preservationists are up in arms about the renovation." The Fairmont was a big deal, a historic building we were reinforcing for modern use. I'd fought to win the bid on that project, not just because it was lucrative, but because I believed in preserving the bones of our city. I frowned. What kind of protest? I thought we were in the clear. Liam sighed. "Olivia Hayes. You know her? She's leading the charge." I recognized the name immediately. Olivia was a well-known preservationist, fiercely protective of the city's history. She wasn't someone you ignored. "I'll handle it," I said, already grabbing my jacket. "I'll talk to her." On the drive over, I rehearsed what I'd say, but when I arrived at the Fairmont, Olivia was already there, standing at the base of the grand marble staircase. Her arms were crossed, her sharp eyes assessing me before I even had a chance to speak. "We're not here to destroy the past, Olivia," I said, keeping my voice steady. "We're reinforcing it." She arched an eyebrow. "So you say." But cutting corners could still compromise the integrity of the original design. I walked her through the plans right there on the steps, pointing out how we'd carefully considered the building's history. By the end of our conversation, she seemed less combative, though not entirely convinced. It wasn't a victory, but it was a start. As I drove back to my workshop, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from Emily, my wife. "Running late tonight. Big meeting with Henry. Don't wait up. Henry Blackwell." The name turned my stomach, though I couldn't explain why. He was one of Emily's biggest clients, a high-profile entrepreneur with more money than sense. Emily had mentioned him often in passing, usually as part of some major business deal. I didn't know the guy personally, but something about the way she spoke about him felt off. I told myself to let it go. Emily was a top-tier financial consultant, and late-night meetings were part of the job. But lately, things hadn't been adding up. I'd noticed inconsistencies in our finances, receipts for expensive dinners I didn't remember us having, charges on her card for things she'd brushed off as work-related. It wasn't just the money. It was her attitude, distracted, secretive. That night, as I stood in the kitchen washing the dishes, her text nagged at the back of my mind. I dried my hands and walked into the home office. Pulling out the drawer where we kept household receipts, I started thumbing through them. First, nothing jumped out. Grocery runs, gas, routine expenses. But then I spotted a charge for a hotel downtown, dated just a few weeks back. A hotel? Emily hadn't mentioned staying downtown for work, and it wasn't the kind of place you'd book for a casual meeting. I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was for a client, but my gut told me otherwise. A few minutes later, I found another receipt, this one for an upscale restaurant. It wasn't somewhere Emily and I had ever been together. Henry's name popped into my mind again, uninvited. Was I overthinking this? The rational part of me said yes. But another part, the part sharpened by years of training to notice small details, told me I wasn't. I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests tightly. That sense of unease grew stronger, whispering that there was more to this than Emily was letting on. If I was going to get to the bottom of it, I needed more than gut feelings. As I pieced through the receipts and statements again, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Certain dates and locations seemed to align with times Emily had mentioned: work dinners, or client meetings. The timelines were too convenient, too perfect. The sound of my phone buzzing yanked me from my thoughts. It was Liam again. "Hey Ethan, just a heads up, we've got another meeting with the city council tomorrow. Olivia's pressing for changes to the project scope." "Great," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "Thanks for the heads up." After hanging up, I stared at the receipts on the desk. The weight of it all felt like a vice tightening around my chest. The Fairmont project was on shaky ground, and now my marriage felt like it was standing on quicksand. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain. I couldn't let this slide. Emily had her secrets, and I was determined to uncover them. As for Henry Blackwell, he was about to get a lot more familiar with the name Ethan Turner. Tomorrow would bring answers, or, at the very least, the start of them. Little did I know, the questions I was asking would uncover far more than I ever bargained for. The more I stared at those receipts and statements, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about Emily and her late-night meetings with Henry Blackwell. Something much bigger was at play, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a dark abyss I wasn't prepared for. The next morning, I left the house early, determined to stay ahead of the mounting chaos. The Fairmont site was my first stop. It was my sanctuary, solid, real, dependable. But as I stepped onto the lot, something felt off. The crew wasn't due to arrive for another hour, but fresh tire tracks in the dirt told me someone had been here before me. I walked the perimeter, scanning for anything out of place. Near the southeast corner, where the renovations were just beginning, I spotted an empty coffee cup. The logo wasn't from the nearby diner our crew frequented. It was from a cafe across town, the kind of place I knew Henry favored. I crouched down, my fingers brushing the rim of the cup. A name scribbled on the side caught my attention. H. Blackwell. My stomach churned. What was Henry doing here after hours? And why didn't anyone tell me? "Ethan?" A voice called from behind me. I stood and turned to see Sofia Ramirez, one of the junior agents from Premier Properties. She was bundled up in a dark coat, her expression cautious, like she wasn't sure whether she should even be talking to me. "Morning, Sofia," I said, trying to sound casual, even though I could feel the tension in my voice. "What brings you here so early?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder before stepping closer. "I need to talk to you, privately." Sofia wasn't someone I knew well, but she had a reputation for being meticulous, almost obsessively so. If something was on her radar, it wasn't by accident. "What's on your mind?" I asked, motioning toward the quiet corner of the site. She took a deep breath, her voice low as she spoke. "I've been reviewing some transactions involving the Fairmont building and a few other properties Premier's handled. There's something off about them. Shell companies, inflated valuations, money disappearing into offshore accounts." I frowned. "And you think it's connected to Henry Blackwell?" "I know it is," she said firmly. "His name doesn't show up directly, but Emily's does. She signed off on almost every deal." Hearing my wife's name hit like a sucker punch. I leaned against the side of the building, trying to keep my expression neutral. "Are you sure about this?" Sofia nodded, pulling out her phone and scrolling through documents she'd saved. "Look at this. These companies don't exist, at least not in any real capacity. They're just fronts for moving money. And these inflated property values? It's all a cover for something else. I don't know what yet, but it's big." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. She hesitated again. "Because you're the only one who might actually care. I overheard Henry talking at a meeting last week. He mentioned your name. Ethan. Whatever's going on, you're in the middle of it, whether you like it or not." My jaw tightened. I thanked her and promised to follow up, though I didn't know what that meant yet. As she walked away, I stared at the documents she'd shown me. Every instinct I had told me this wasn't just a string of bad decisions or poor judgment. This was deliberate. When I got home that night, Emily was already there, sitting at the dining table with her laptop open. She looked up as I entered, her smile forced. "You're home late," she said, closing the lid of her laptop. "So are you," I replied, hanging my coat by the door. "Busy day." She nodded, avoiding eye contact. The usual. Meetings, paperwork. You know how it is. Funny, I said, pulling out one of the receipts I'd found the night before. Because I came across this today. Her eyes darted to the receipt in my hand, and for a moment, I saw something flicker in her expression. Panic, maybe. What is that? She asked, her voice too controlled. It's a receipt for a dinner at La Belle Maison, I said, placing it on the table in front of her. The same night you told me you were working late. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was a business dinner, she said finally. With Henry Blackwell? Depressed. Her silence said more than words ever could. Emily? I said, my voice low. If there's something going on, something I need to know, you need to tell me now. Her face hardened, her eyes narrowing. Ethan, I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but you're wrong. Henry's a client, nothing more. If you're trying to turn this into something it's not, you're wasting your time. I nodded slowly, letting her words hang in the air. But I didn't believe her. Not for a second. The next day, Liam called me from the Fairmont site. You need to see this, he said. When I arrived, he showed me security footage from the night before. The grainy video showed Henry meeting with two men near the back of the building. They handed him a briefcase before walking away. This doesn't look like a friendly visit, Liam said, crossing his arms. No, it doesn't. I agreed, my mind racing. I stood there, staring at the screen, piecing together the fragments of everything I'd learned. Shady property deals, offshore accounts, late-night meetings, unexplained receipts. It all pointed to a larger conspiracy. But what was Emily's role in it? Was she just caught up in Henry's web? Or was she an active participant? I needed answers, and I wasn't going to get them by sitting on the sidelines. My military training kicked in as I began mapping out a plan. If Henry Blackwell thought he could manipulate people and hide in the shadows, he was about to learn otherwise. As for Emily, I wasn't sure I wanted to know the truth, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than betrayal, and I was going to uncover every last piece of it. I thought I'd prepared myself for what I might uncover, but the deeper I dug, the more unsettling the truth became. It wasn't just Emily's behavior, Henry's shady deals, or even the inconsistencies in the Fairmont project. It was the threads connecting them. They weren't just tangled. They were woven into a web so intricate it made my head spin. And the worst part? It was becoming impossible to tell where my wife fit in the picture. The first clue came from an unlikely place. Emily's car. She'd left it in the driveway that morning, keys still in the ignition. I told myself I wasn't crossing a line by looking inside. I was just following the trail. And what I found under the passenger seat made my stomach turn. It was a crumpled receipt for a wire transfer to an offshore account. The amount was staggering, far beyond what any business transaction should have been. The name on the account wasn't Emily's or Henry's, but it wasn't hard to connect the dots. I photographed the receipt and slid it back where I found it, my heart pounding. That same day, Olivia Hayes called me. I've been going through the Fairmont project files, she said, her tone tense. There are patterns here, Ethan. The kind you don't ignore. What kind of patterns? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Historical preservation fraud, she replied. Henry Blackwell's been involved in similar ventures before. He inflates property values, cuts corners, and pockets the difference. The preservation angle is just a cover. Her words hit me like a freight train. The Fairmont project wasn't just another job for me. It was my chance to prove myself, to leave a mark on the city I loved. Knowing it was tainted by Henry's schemes made my blood boil. Olivia, I said, gripping the phone tightly. I need everything you have. If there's a way to stop this, I'm going to find it. By that evening, I knew I needed help. My mind kept going back to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Natalie Carter, a detective I'd worked with on a pro bono case years ago. She was sharp, unflinching, and someone I could trust. When I called her, she answered on the second ring. Ethan Turner, she said, her voice laced with curiosity. What brings you back into my world? It's a long story, I replied. But I need your help. It's about Henry Blackwell. Her silence told me she knew exactly who I was talking about. "Meet me tomorrow," she said, "and bring everything you've got." The next morning, Sofia Ramirez called me before I could leave the house. Her voice was shaky, unsteady, so unlike the composed professional I'd met before. "Ethan," she said, "you need to see this." She emailed me a file containing insurance policies under Emily's name. At first, I didn't understand the significance. Then I noticed the beneficiary listed on every policy, me. "I don't know what this means," Sofia continued, "but it doesn't look good. These policies were updated recently, right around the time all this started." My heart sank. Insurance policies like these weren't unusual, but the timing and amounts were enough to make me break out in a cold sweat. Was my wife involved in something that put my life in danger? The idea seemed absurd. But then again, so did everything else about the past few weeks. I thanked Sofia and promised to keep her updated, though I wasn't sure how much I could share. My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. When I met Natalie at a quiet diner later that day, I laid everything out on the table. Literally. Receipts, photos, emails, security footage. She sifted through the evidence with the methodical precision of someone who'd seen it all before. "This is big," she said finally. "Bigger than I thought. Henry's activities aren't just shady, they're criminal. If Emily's involved, even peripherally, you need to tread carefully." "I know," I said, my jaw tightening. "But I need proof before I confront her. I can't just throw accusations around." Natalie nodded. "Then we do this right. Methodically. No shortcuts." She handed me a list of next steps. People to contact, documents to obtain, questions to ask without raising suspicion. It was overwhelming, but it was exactly what I needed. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Emily lay beside me, her breathing steady and even. I wondered if she felt anything at all, guilt, fear, regret. Or was she so deep into Henry's schemes that she didn't care? The next day, I focused on gathering more evidence. Olivia sent me detailed reports on Henry's previous projects, each one more damning than the last. Natalie dug into the offshore accounts Sofia had uncovered, tracing the money back to shell companies linked to Henry's network. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they painted was bleak. By the end of the week, I had enough to take to the authorities, but I wasn't ready to make that move yet. Not until I was certain Emily's involvement was as deep as it seemed. If there was even a sliver of doubt, I needed to find it. But doubt was a luxury I couldn't afford. With every new discovery, it became harder to believe that Emily was just an unwitting pawn. The insurance policies, the receipts, the unapproved meetings at the Fairmont site, they all pointed to one thing: betrayal. Late one night, as I reviewed the evidence again, my phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. "We need to talk. I found something." The message was vague, but it filled me with a mix of dread and anticipation. Whatever Natalie had uncovered, it was bound to change everything. I grabbed my keys and headed out the door, the weight of the truth pressing heavier on my shoulders with every step. What I didn't realize was that the truth wasn't just heavy. It was dangerous, and I was walking straight into its jaws. I've always believed in the power of a strong team. My time in the military taught me that no mission succeeds without the right people in the right roles. As I stared at the mountain of evidence piling up against Henry Blackwell, I knew I couldn't tackle this alone. If I was going to expose the truth and protect everyone involved, I needed help. People I could trust implicitly. The first call I made was to Jackson Reed. Jackson wasn't just a former Delta Force operative. He was the kind of guy who could read a room and a situation before anyone else knew there was something to read. When I told him what I was dealing with, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "You're telling me your wife is tied up in some kind of property scam with Henry Blackwell?" he finally said. "This Henry Blackwell?" "Yeah," I said, "and it's worse than it sounds." "That's saying something," he muttered. "I'm in. Tell me where to start." Next, I reached out to Grace Mitchell, a forensic accountant I'd worked with on a few local projects. Grace had a reputation for finding money trails where no one else could. When I laid out what we knew about Henry's offshore accounts, she didn't even flinch. "This is amateur hour compared to some of the schemes I've unraveled," she said with a wry smile. "But you're right, it's serious. If Henry's been laundering money through preservation projects, it's only a matter of time before the feds catch wind. Let's make sure we're ready when they do." With Jackson and Grace on board, the next piece of the puzzle was someone who could handle the digital side of things. That's where Mia Zhang came in. Mia was a cybersecurity expert who'd built her career unraveling the kinds of encrypted networks Henry seemed to rely on. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop downtown, her laptop already open when I arrived. "This is messy," she said after I explained the situation. "But not impossible. Henry's network is sophisticated, sure, but he's sloppy. I'll dig through his communications and see what I can find. Just don't ask me where I got it when this is over." Her confidence was reassuring, even if her methods made me nervous. I couldn't afford to be picky, not with so much at stake. As the team came together, Olivia Hayes continued to dig into Henry's history with preservation projects. She brought me a file that made my blood run cold. "These are just a few of the projects Henry's been involved in," she said, laying out photos and documents on the table. "They all follow the same pattern: fraudulent renovations, inflated costs, and funds disappearing into shell companies. It's the same blueprint he's using for the Fairmont." I thumbed through the evidence, the scope of Henry's operation becoming clearer with every page. He wasn't just manipulating Emily, he was manipulating entire communities, profiting off the destruction of their history. And then Olivia said something that stopped me in my tracks. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, "I think Emily's a victim here, too." I didn't want to believe it. For weeks, I'd been wrestling with the idea that Emily had betrayed me, that she'd chosen to be part of Henry's schemes. But Olivia's evidence painted a different picture. "She signed off on the deals." "Sure," Olivia explained. "But look at the timelines. Henry put her in a position where she had no choice. He used her expertise and her name to legitimize his operation. This isn't just fraud, it's manipulation." Hearing that didn't erase the anger I felt, but it gave me clarity. If Emily was being used, she might not even realize the full extent of what she was involved in. And if that was true, I needed to protect her as much as anyone else. The team worked tirelessly over the next week, piecing together every fragment of evidence we could find. Grace traced money flows through offshore accounts, while Mia cracked Henry's encrypted communications. What she found was staggering. "Henry's not just laundering money," Mia said during one of our late-night strategy sessions. "He's running a full-blown criminal network. These messages connect him to contractors, politicians, even a few high-profile investors. If we play this right, we can take down the whole operation." But playing it right meant being methodical. Natalie Carter kept us grounded, reminding us that every piece of evidence needed to hold up under scrutiny. "This isn't just about catching Henry," she said. "It's about making sure he pays for what he's done. That means airtight proof." As we closed in on Henry, another bombshell dropped. Mia found a communication thread that suggested Emily's name had been used to set up life insurance policies, the same ones Sophia had found. "They're tying up loose ends," Mia said grimly. "Henry's getting ready to cut and run. And if Emily's a liability," she didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Emily wasn't just in danger of losing her career. She was in danger, period. For the first time, I felt the weight of what this meant for my family. This wasn't just about exposing fraud or saving the Fairmont project. This was about survival. By the end of the week, the plan was in place. We had everything we needed to take to federal authorities: financial records, communications, and evidence of fraudulent property dealings. But timing was critical. If Henry got wind of what we were doing, he'd vanish before we could stop him. "We need to move fast," Jackson said during our final meeting. "The moment we act, Henry's going to know. We have to be ready for whatever comes next." I nodded, my mind racing. For weeks, I'd felt like a man standing alone in the dark, searching for answers. But now, with this team beside me, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. We were ready. And when the time came, we'd make sure Henry Blackwell wouldn't just fall. He'd never recover. When I found out about the event Henry and Emily were planning at the penthouse, I knew it was our best, and possibly last, chance to bring everything crashing down around him. It wasn't just any event. This was a high-profile gathering of investors and city officials, the kind of crowd Henry relied on to keep his schemes afloat. If we played our cards right, we could not only expose him but ensure his entire network unraveled in the process. My team was ready. Jackson had reconned the penthouse. Grace had prepped the financial records we'd expose. Mia was poised to shut down Henry's encrypted network, and Natalie had coordinated with federal authorities. Every piece was in place. Now, it was just a matter of execution. The evening arrived with a storm rolling in, a fitting backdrop for the chaos that was about to unfold. The penthouse glittered with luxury, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the city. I watched from a nearby surveillance van as guests arrived, oblivious to what was about to happen. Mia's voice came through my earpiece. "We've got eyes on Henry. He's in the main lounge, schmoozing with some big names. Emily's with him." I clenched my fists. Seeing Emily standing by Henry's side, smiling like nothing was wrong, sent a fresh wave of anger through me. But this wasn't about emotions, not tonight. I took a deep breath and focused. "Start the shutdown," I said. Mia's fingers flew over her keyboard, shutting down his comms in 3, 2, 1. Inside the penthouse, Henry's phone buzzed with a flurry of notifications before going silent. His associates, scattered among the guests, began checking their devices, confusion spreading across their faces. The first domino had fallen. I entered the penthouse just as the tension was beginning to build. Security had been minimal, likely because Henry didn't think anyone could touch him. He was wrong. I spotted Emily near the bar, her hand wrapped around a glass of champagne. She looked poised and confident, but I could see the cracks beneath the surface. "Emily," I said, stepping beside her. She turned, her smile faltering the moment she saw me. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. She glanced around nervously. "This isn't the time." "It's the only time," I replied, pulling a folded packet of documents from my pocket. "You're going to want to see this." I led her to a quieter corner, away from prying eyes. As she scanned the documents, her face went pale. "This is," she stammered. "How did you?" "I know everything, Emily," I said. "The offshore accounts, the insurance policies, the fraudulent deals. But the worst part? Henry planned to leave you holding the bag. Every piece of evidence points to you as the mastermind." Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. "No, that's not true," he said. "He said this was all above board." "Then why are your signatures on every document?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. She shook her head, tears welling up. "I didn't know, Ethan. I swear. I thought I was just handling routine business." He lied to me. I believed her. The raw fear in her eyes wasn't something you could fake. "Then help me stop him," I said, my tone softening. "Tell me everything you know." As Emily detailed Henry's operations, the scope of his crimes became even clearer. He wasn't just exploiting preservation projects. He was using them as a front to launder millions, bribing officials and manipulating markets to cover his tracks. Emily's information filled in the final gaps in our case. Meanwhile, Mia's voice crackled in my earpiece. "Ethan, heads up. Federal agents are en route. 5 minutes out." "Copy that," I replied. Jackson moved into position near the lounge, keeping an eye on Henry. Grace joined me, carrying a briefcase filled with hard copies of the evidence we'd gathered. When the agents arrived, everything had to be airtight. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Federal agents swarmed the penthouse, their presence sparking a wave of panic among the guests. Henry's calm demeanor crumbled as agents approached him, their badges flashing. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This," I said, stepping forward, "is the end of the line, Henry." He turned to me, his face a mask of fury. "You think you've won? You don't know who you're dealing with." Actually, I replied, I think I know you better than you know yourself. And now, so do they. As agents escorted him away, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. But it wasn't over yet. I turned to Emily, who stood frozen near the bar. You're going to need to cooperate fully, I said. This isn't just about saving yourself. It's about doing the right thing. She nodded, her expression hollow. I will. I promise. The night ended with Henry and his associates in custody, their empire of lies dismantled piece by piece. The evidence we'd gathered was enough to ensure convictions, and the Fairmont Project was safe from the taint of his schemes. As I stood outside the penthouse, the storm finally breaking into a drizzle, Natalie joined me. You did good, Ethan, she said. It wasn't about me, I replied. It was about justice, and making sure no one else gets hurt. She nodded, her eyes scanning the skyline. Still, you should be proud. Not everyone would have done what you did. Maybe she was right. But as I watched the flashing lights of the agents' vehicles disappear into the night, I couldn't help but feel that this wasn't just about taking down Henry Blackwell. It was about rebuilding trust in the people around me, in the work I did, and maybe one day in myself. The courtroom was packed. Reporters lined the back walls, their cameras flashing as Henry Blackwell was led to the defendant's table. His usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by a pale, hollow expression. For years, he'd hidden behind charm, wealth, and an intricate web of lies. Today, that web had unraveled, and the world was about to see the man behind it. The trial lasted weeks. Witness after witness detailed the depth of Henry's schemes, fraudulent preservation projects, money laundering, bribes, and extortion. It was clear that no one had been safe from his reach. Vulnerable property owners, community leaders, even government officials had been targeted in his decades-long con. But the turning point came when Emily took the stand. Her testimony was raw and unflinching. She admitted to signing off on deals she didn't fully understand, trusting Henry when she shouldn't have. She detailed how he manipulated her, exploiting her expertise and reputation to legitimize his crimes. While her involvement had been unintentional, she didn't shy away from taking responsibility. I should have asked more questions, she said, her voice trembling. I should have known better. And for that, I'm sorry. Her cooperation earned her leniency, but she still faced consequences. Fines, community service, and the loss of her professional license. It was a harsh lesson, but one she was determined to learn from. For me, seeing Emily on the stand was bittersweet. It was hard to reconcile the woman I'd loved with the person who'd been caught in Henry's schemes. But her willingness to come forward, to help dismantle his network, gave me hope that she could find her way back to the person she used to be. The trial's outcome was swift and decisive. Henry was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy. He received a sentence that would ensure he'd never exploit anyone again. But the impact of the case didn't end there. The Fairmont Project became a symbol of how ethical development could honor historical integrity. Olivia Hayes worked tirelessly with community leaders to implement stricter oversight on preservation projects, ensuring that no one could exploit them the way Henry had. It's not just about protecting buildings, Olivia said at a community forum. It's about protecting the stories they tell and the people they represent. Her passion inspired others, and soon similar reforms were being adopted in neighboring states. For my part, I threw myself into expanding my construction company. The Fairmont Project had reminded me why I got into the business in the first place. To build something lasting, something that mattered. With the help of Jackson Reed, I launched a veteran employment program, giving former service members a chance to transition back into civilian life. It wasn't just about jobs, it was about providing structure, purpose, and a sense of community. Watching those men and women find their footing again was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And in a way, it helped me heal too. Natalie Carter's investigative unit also saw changes. Inspired by the Fairmont case, they adopted new fraud detection strategies, focusing on early warning signs and preventive measures. The system isn't perfect, Natalie told me over coffee one day, but cases like this remind us why we do what we do. It's about more than catching the bad guys. It's about creating a system that makes it harder for them to operate in the first place. Her words stuck with me. The case had set a precedent, encouraging others to come forward with information about corruption. Calls to fraud hotlines spiked in the weeks following Henry's conviction, as people realized that their voices could make a difference. The Fairmont building, once a symbol of Henry's greed, was finally completed. Its grand reopening drew a crowd, with community leaders, preservationists, and my team all in attendance. As I stood on the steps, looking up at the restored facade, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just a building. It was proof that even in the face of deception and betrayal, something good could emerge. When Olivia joined me, she smiled. "You did it, Ethan. We did it." "We did," I said, nodding. In the months that followed, life slowly began to settle. Emily moved out of the house, choosing to focus on rebuilding her career and her reputation. We kept things civil for the most part. She knew there was no going back to what we'd had, but we found a way to move forward, separately but with respect. For me, the journey wasn't just about exposing Henry or saving the Fairmont. It was about finding my own sense of justice and integrity, even when everything around me seemed to crumble. The trial wasn't just the end of Henry's network. It was the beginning of something new, a reminder that justice isn't just about punishment. It's about accountability, redemption, and the chance to rebuild. And as I walked past the Fairmont one evening, its windows glowing in the fading light, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. The weeks following Henry Blackwell's trial were a whirlwind of change. For the first time in what felt like years, I could finally breathe. But as much as I wanted to step back and take a moment to process everything, I knew there was still work to be done. The case had exposed more than just corruption. It had revealed the cracks in an industry that desperately needed rebuilding. If there was one thing my time in the military taught me, it was this: the real mission begins after the battle ends. And for me, that mission was about building something meaningful, something that would outlast all the chaos and deceit we just unraveled. My veteran employment program started small, just a handful of guys working on local projects. But word spread quickly. Former service members reached out, eager for the chance to build a new life. Some were fresh out of the military, looking for structure and purpose. Others were older, struggling to transition after years of feeling disconnected from civilian life. Ryan Bennett, one of my closest friends from the Army, stepped up as the head of site operations. He had a way of connecting with people, of making sure everyone felt valued. Under his leadership, our projects ran like clockwork. But more importantly, they ran ethically, a point we emphasized in every decision we made. "This isn't just about the work," Ryan told me one day as we walked a new site. "It's about the people, giving them a chance to be part of something bigger." He was right, and watching those men and women find their footing again reminded me why I started this program in the first place. Sofia Ramirez, the junior agent who'd risked everything to expose Henry's schemes, found her own way to make a difference. She transitioned into a leadership role at an ethical real estate firm, using her experience to champion transparency and fairness. "People deserve to trust the system," she told me during a coffee break one day, "and I'm going to make sure they can." She wasn't just saying it. She meant it. Sofia's firm became a beacon of integrity in an industry that had lost its way, and I couldn't have been prouder to see her thriving. Jackson Reed, the man who always seemed to know the right move before anyone else, expanded his security firm to include a division dedicated to protecting construction sites from fraud and external threats. He partnered with my company, providing top-tier security for every project we took on. "You build it, Ethan," he said with a grin. "I'll make sure no one messes with it." It was a partnership that just made sense. Jackson's presence gave our team a sense of safety and stability, a reminder that someone always had our backs. Meanwhile, Olivia Hayes continued her work as a preservationist, but her focus shifted. The Fairmont case had taught her that preservation wasn't just about saving buildings. It was about uplifting communities. Her group expanded its reach, collaborating on projects that combined historical integrity with growth and innovation. She worked closely with local leaders, ensuring that every project respected the past while building for the future. We can't just save history for history's sake, she said during one of her community talks. We have to make it relevant, make it part of the story we're writing now. Her vision resonated, and before long, her group became a nationwide force for positive change. Mia Zhang's contributions were no less transformative. After the trial, she developed cybersecurity tools that revolutionized fraud prevention in the real estate industry. Her software became the gold standard for detecting and preventing scams like the ones Henry had orchestrated. It's all about staying one step ahead, Mia said when I asked how she managed it. People like Henry thrive on secrecy. Take that away, and they've got nothing. Her tools didn't just protect businesses, they protected people. And knowing that she was out there, working to make the industry safer, gave me a sense of hope I hadn't felt in years. Together, we built more than just a network of professionals. We built a community, a team committed to honesty, integrity, and collaboration. Our efforts didn't just rebuild trust in the Fairmont project. They set a precedent for what could be achieved when people came together with a shared purpose. The Fairmont building stood as a testament to that vision. Its grand reopening drew attention from across the country, but for me, the most rewarding part was seeing the people who made it possible. Veterans who'd found new careers, preservationists who'd fought for its history, and a team that had turned the tide against corruption. As the months turned into years, the impact of our work continued to ripple outward. The trial encouraged others to come forward, exposing corruption in industries far beyond real estate. Natalie Carter's investigative unit became a model for fraud detection, and her work inspired a wave of reforms that reshaped the landscape. For me, life found a new rhythm. The veteran program grew, and I spent my days mentoring young carpenters and project managers, passing on the lessons I'd learned. Every time I walked onto a job site, I felt a sense of pride, not just in the work we were doing, but in the people who made it possible. Looking back, the Fairmont case wasn't just about taking down Henry Blackwell. It was about proving that even in the face of betrayal, loss, and corruption, there's a way forward. We didn't just build buildings, we built trust. We built hope. And most importantly, we built a legacy. 10 years can change everything. The world doesn't slow down, and neither do the people who work to shape it. But standing on the rooftop garden of the Fairmont building, looking out at the city skyline, I realized some things hadn't changed. The Fairmont still stood tall, not just as a building but as a symbol, a testament to what could be built when integrity replaced greed and collaboration replaced corruption. And that's what we had done. Turner Construction had become more than a business, it was a movement. Every project we took on carried the same mission: ethical urban development that uplifted veterans and communities alike. From affordable housing with integrated community spaces to secure preservation practices, we were setting a new standard. At the heart of it all was a lesson I'd learned the hard way. Trust isn't given, it's earned. And once earned, it must be protected. Charlotte Parker, my wife and partner, understood that better than anyone. As a legal consultant, she brought sharp insight and unshakable determination to everything we built. We'd met during a zoning dispute on one of my early projects. She was representing the community. I walked into that meeting ready for a fight, but she disarmed me with her no-nonsense approach and unwavering belief in doing what was right. What began as professional respect grew into something more, and now we were a team in every sense of the word. We're not just building structures, Ethan, she reminded me during one of our late-night strategy sessions. We're building futures, for veterans, for families, for entire communities. She was right, and together, we'd launched comprehensive programs that combined job training, mental health support, and community integration for veterans. One of the programs closest to my heart was inspired by Tommy, my old dog. He'd been my constant companion through some of the toughest times, his quiet presence grounding me in ways I didn't fully appreciate until he was gone. Charlotte had the idea to create therapy animal programs for veterans, and we named the first center after Tommy. Seeing veterans find comfort and healing through those programs was one of the most rewarding parts of our work. They need more than a job, Charlotte said once, as we watched a group of veterans train with their therapy dogs. They need connection, purpose, and hope. Tommy's legacy lived on in those programs. a reminder that even small gestures of support can lead to profound change. Our work didn't stop at the city limits. As the years passed, Turner Construction expanded globally, replicating our model for ethical development in major cities around the world. From New York to Tokyo, Berlin to Cape Town, the projects varied, but the principles remained the same: transparency, collaboration, and integrity. Each project had its own story, but they all shared one common thread: people coming together to create something greater than themselves. The team that had once dismantled Henry Blackwell's empire remained an integral part of the journey. Ryan Bennett now oversaw operations across multiple continents, ensuring our projects ran smoothly and ethically. He'd become more than a manager, he was a mentor, passing on his leadership skills to the next generation. Sofia Ramirez had started her own firm, specializing in real estate transparency initiatives. She partnered with us often, helping to keep the industry accountable and fostering trust between developers and communities. Jackson Reed's security firm had grown alongside Turner Construction, protecting our projects and training veterans in specialized security roles. His no-nonsense approach kept us grounded, and his friendship remained one of the constants in my life. Olivia Hayes, now a nationally recognized preservationist, continued to champion the balance between history and progress. Her influence reached far beyond city limits, shaping policies and inspiring others to view preservation as a bridge to the future, not a barrier. Mia Zhang's cybersecurity tools became the backbone of fraud prevention worldwide. What started as a personal mission to expose Henry Blackwell's network had evolved into a global initiative, saving countless businesses from falling victim to schemes like his. Together, we had become more than just colleagues. We were a family bound by shared values and a commitment to leaving the world better than we found it. The Fairmont building remained a cornerstone of it all. Its once tainted past had been transformed into a beacon of hope. Community events, veteran art showcases, and small business markets filled its halls, a vibrant reminder of what integrity could achieve. Standing in its rooftop garden, Charlotte at my side, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. "Think we've done enough?" she asked, a teasing smile tugging at her lips. "Not even close," I replied, returning her smile. The work wasn't done. It never would be. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing closure. I was building something new. The legacy of betrayal that had once threatened to consume everything I cared about was now a distant memory. In its place stood a legacy of trust, integrity, and opportunity. A reminder that even in the face of the worst, we can choose to build something better. And as I looked out at the city, its lights glowing against the night sky, I knew this was only the beginning.